mentioned, Iain, about whether sort of the Spygate story, the spy who loves MPs, as it was on our brief this morning, Christine Lee, who is this well, if you haven't seen or listened to Iain's show, I thoroughly recommend it. He's a brilliant broadcaster. But last night you had Barry Gardiner on your show for a good hour, if not more, answering every question you had. Can you just outline to anybody that hasn't seen this story, because it's been hidden amongst many of the other headlines this morning, what exactly has gone on here and why it seems so sinister?
Well, Christine Lee is a British-Chinese citizen. I mean, she is a British citizen. And she approached, and she's a lawyer, she had a law firm, and she was introduced to Barry Gardiner by a third party quite some years ago now. And over the last, I think, 7 or 8 years, has funded his parliamentary office to the tune of £420,000. And that money was used to pay for hiring researchers. Now, this is not unusual in some ways, because MPs they have money from the taxpayer to do that as well. But if you're in the shadow cabinet, and when I worked for David Davis 17 years ago, part of my role was to raise money to fund his office in his fight against Labour Home Secretaries, of which he got rid of 2, but not this one.
Exactly.
So there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to be so careful about where that money is coming from. And clearly he didn't do his due diligence. Now, he was then approached after a couple of years by the security services and said, look, this woman we think is a little bit, you should just be a bit wary. They didn't actually say to him, you must stop taking this money. But if Jackie or I were in that position, I think we would have immediately done so anyway, because so, well, if you get approached by MI5, that's a bit scary.
But it wasn't just him, was it? There's pictures of her with David Cameron.
Yeah.
It seems to be a sort of a new form of spying, which the security service have been aware of.
Well, it's
a kind of an influence, as opposed to espionage.
We know why that was, because the Chinese government, or the Chinese state, was investing heavily in the British nuclear industry. And they also gave Sir Ed Davies' constituency party £5,000. He was Energy Secretary at the time. And Barry Gardiner was Shadow Energy Secretary for Labour. And I said to him, did you not sort of think that there might be some link here?
Conflict.
And he said, well, no.
And of course, a lot of that money was going to pay her son to be part of his office.
Well, that's another compliment. Well, that's not quite right. He says that's not quite right. He says that her son volunteered in his office, and then they had a full-time position become available. He applied for it, and in a fair competition with others, and hey presto, he got the job. But I mean, anybody looking at that thinks, well,
it looks like there's some influencing and infiltration going on.
That's what the money was for, I should say. I mean, it's not the first time that foreign states have tried to cozy up to members of parliament or government ministers or officials. It does happen, and the security services are very aware of it and have had to previously, slightly less publicly than this, warn people about that in the case of Russia, for example. But this is it's pretty clear that she was being supported by the Chinese Communist Party to make contacts with a whole range of politicians. Now, Barry Gardiner had by far the largest amount of money and the largest contact, but she sort of, there are various photos in the newspapers today of her with different political figures, with Jeremy Corbyn, with David Cameron. And I think first of all, it's outrageous that a foreign power is trying to buy influence in our democracy like that. Secondly, as Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, points out, it's also actually now quite important to understand what the security agencies think is the scale of this and how you advise MPs about what they should do. Because MPs tend to operate like and are effectively individual employers. They don't have access to vetting for their staff, and they need advice. Exactly.
Yeah.
But the thing that was really impressive, as you say, was that Barry Gardiner was willing to sit down and be forensically interviewed about this, because he had nothing. Well, in his mind, he wanted to share what he knew and get everything out there as well. And we could do with sort of a few more politicians being willing.
We can invite him on again this morning, can't we, Boris? Do you want to come on and talk it?
David Hines is joining us a little bit later on, though, so we'll be able to put some of those points in. It would be nice to have a government minister with us. Iain, Jackie, thank you very much for joining us.